Welcome back. We are in the content. In the table of contents, we're going to click on Unit 1 and look for 1.15, Making Connections, Rococo to Romantic. Right-click on your quiz, open that link in a new window, get that quiz and then size that window down so you can still read the questions and see your scroll bar. Good job. And then let's go ahead and click on our lesson and make sure that that's sized down as well so that you can see both your test window and the lesson. Very good. Question number 1. How did Romantic artists depart from neoclassical conventions? Here we have the Oath of Horatii by Jacques-Louis David and Liberty Leading the People by Eugène Delacroix. How did the Romantic artists depart from neoclassical conventions? Is it that Romantic artists used smooth brushstrokes to create lifelike depictions of the figure? Is it Romantic artists used one-point perspective techniques to create the illusion of depth? Is it Romantic artists turned away from rational thinking and reason and depicted emotion and drama? Or Romantic artists painted frivolous subjects instead of using art to teach moral behavior? Question 2. What conventions did Shardene and Delacroix use in these paintings to give the artworks a sense of harmony and stability? Here's Grace Before Meal by Jean-Baptiste Siméon Shardene and Liberty Leading the People, Eugène Delacroix. So what is the technique that creates harmony and stability? Can you identify it? Is it the pyramid configuration, one-point perspective, foreshortening, or tenebrism? Question 3. What is one similarity between Watteau's Pilgrimage to Cythera and Goya's The 3rd of May, 1808? One similarity. Is it the artists depict politically charged historical events? Is it the artists use lively expressive brushstrokes? Is it the artists use a pyramid configuration to unify the figures? Or is it the artists create drama by using a single light source? Let's find out. Making connections in Rococo and Romantic art. 4 distinct styles characterize 18th century European art. In the early 18th century, Rococo artists painted pictures of romantic love with flamboyant details, while naturalist painters depicted scenes of everyday life. As the century came to a close, neoclassical artworks reveal clean, simple lines and a direct connection to the classical period. At the dawn of the 19th century, artists painting in the Romantic style presented a distinctly different approach, crafting politically charged images filled with danger, adventure, and emotion. Comparing and contrasting artworks of different styles helps us better understand their significance. Goals for this lesson: compare and contrast specific works of art and architecture from Rococo to Romantic. Compare and contrast specific works of art from Rococo to Romantic. Artists' purpose. Early 18th century Europe gave rise to both Rococo and naturalist art. Rococo artists catered to the ornate tastes of the French aristocracy by creating fanciful decorative works. Naturalist artists believed this style was artificial, even decadent, so they created genre paintings that depicted ordinary people engaged in everyday activities. Later in the 18th century, as artists rebelled against Rococo style, 2 distinct styles emerged. Neoclassical artists created highly realistic paintings and sculpture with a noble purpose that was grounded in reason, while Romantic artists produced dramatic works in response to the tumultuous political climate in Spain and France. Each of the works shown here reflects a distinct artistic purpose. If you were to create a painting that reveals contemporary beliefs, What might you depict? Antoine Watteau's pilgrimage to Cythera catered to the ornate tastes of French royalty and aristocracy. Shardene painted Grace Before Meal to depict scenes of everyday people engaged in ordinary activities. Jacques-Louis David believed the purpose of art was to teach moral behavior, as seen in the Oath of Horatii. Francisco Goya's the 3rd of May, 1808, commemorates the killing of Spanish peasants by Napoleonic soldiers. And Eugène Delacroix painted Liberty leading the people to convey his personal beliefs about the French uprising of 1830. Varied subject matter. The subject matter of a work of art often reflects the religious, political, or social beliefs of the artist and his or her times. With the onset of the Enlightenment in the early 18th century, wealthy aristocrats supported the frivolous scenes created by Rococo artists, but they also commissioned the more down-to-earth works created by naturalist genre painters. In the second half of the 18th century, artistic themes shifted as neoclassical artists depicted subjects that inspired patriotism and taught moral values. They modeled their figures after ancient Greek and Roman statues. Artists who worked in the Romantic style painted emotional scenes filled with danger, adventure, and political turmoil. Varied subject matter. Grace Before Meal by Shardene. Question 1. Shardene was an accomplished genre painter and still life artist. What is the theme of Grace Before Meal? What's the theme? In Grace Before Meal, Shardene depicts the everyday scene of an ordinary mother and her 2 children saying a prayer before dinner. Oath of Horatii by Jacques-Louis David. Question 2. Jacques-Louis David believed the purpose of art was to teach moral behavior. How does he achieve this in the Oath of Horatii? In Oath of Horatii, David shows a pivotal moment in the ancient war between the city-states of Rome and Elba. He depicts Horus, the proud father, holding his son's swords high as the young men enthusiastically pledge their allegiance to Rome and their willingness to die in her service. Liberty Leading the People by Eugène Delacroix. Question 3. How does Eugène Delacroix's painting of Liberty reflect the political climate of France in the early 19th century? Delacroix's narrative painting depicts a jumbled mass of revolutionaries led by the allegorical figure of Liberty rising up against the repressive leadership of King Charles X. Symbolism. Many artists use the human figure to symbolize religious themes, political events, and personal ideas in their works. Eugène Delacroix filled Liberty leading the people with symbolic imagery. Liberty's Phrygian cap is a symbol of freedom and rebellion. Similarly, Francisco Goya and Antoine Watteau depict figures with religious symbolism. Delacroix used the allegorical figure of Liberty to anchor his painting. She wears the Phrygian cap, a symbol of freedom during the French Revolution. Watteau painted winged cupids to symbolize Aphrodite, the goddess of love. They led couples to the island of Cythera, which was Aphrodite's birthplace. Goya depicts the soon-to-be executed peasant in a Christ-like pose with his arms outstretched as if he were nailed to the cross. Composition. Artists make many decisions when they arrange the compositional elements of a painting. Some artists strive for harmony and unity, while others lean towards dramatic, asymmetrical arrangements. Some 18th century artists used Italian High Renaissance techniques such as the pyramid configuration to organize a painting's elements within a triangle, giving the artwork a sense of harmony and stability. Many drew inspiration from other artistic sources, including ballet and theater. Compositional style. We have Grace Before Meal by Shardene and Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix. Question 1. What type of compositional convention did Shardene and Delacroix use in these 2 works? Both works use the pyramid configuration, which unifies the forms and provides compositional balance. We have Pilgrimage to Cythera by Watteau and Oath of Horatii by David. Question 2. What type of composition do you see in these two paintings? Oh, I guess they're not going to give us the answer. I see a pyramidal composition. How about you? I also see a group of pilgrims in the foreground and a separate group in the background, and I see a group here, so I see the way that the artist has used different groupings. And in both, they seem to be set on a stage, don't they? In Goya's The 3rd of May, he uses a dramatic asymmetrical composition. Do you see the asymmetry? Asymmetry means that you draw a line down the middle and the two halves are not symmetrical. For example, the reason why is that on the left, we have a figure that's very brightly lit. We see all of their faces. We have people that are on the ground. We have a nice configuration of a pyramid over here. And then when we look over on this half, it's dark. We are only seeing the backs. We don't have a pyramid configuration over here. It looks more like a rectangle or a square. So the energy is over here where we see those diagonal lines. Everything's horizontal here. It's very grounded and staunch. Depicting Space. Centuries after the Italian High Renaissance, many painters continued to employ Renaissance techniques to create the illusion of space. Some relied on Leonardo da Vinci's method of showing distance called atmospheric perspective. Remember, atmospheric perspective is the technique in art for creating the illusion of depth in a painting by making the distant objects less detailed, paler, and bluer. Look, it's subtly blue back there than the nearby objects, and it's also called aerial perspective. They painted distant objects paler, bluer, and in less detail than nearby objects. Others used the mathematical system of one-point perspective to show depth. One-point perspective, this was the mathematical system artists used to show depth in a painting involved in drawing a horizontal line, vanishing point, and orthogonal lines, also called linear perspective and scientific perspective, which we don't see so much in this painting. But when we see a painting that has that one-point perspective, I will share that with you. I'll try to remember. Depicting Space. In Pilgrimage to Cythera, see how Watteau created the illusion of depth in his painting? Then select Reveal to see suggested answers. Do you see atmospheric perspective? Are the characters getting paler and bluer, and including the landscape? Is the landscape getting paler and bluer and softer and more subtle as it goes into the depth of the painting? And then the characters that are in the foreground are brighter, more detailed. That's atmospheric perspective. Liberty leading the people. See how Delacroix created the illusion of depth in this painting. Then select Reveal. So let's see. How did he create depth in that painting? Do you remember the words? Can you say them out loud? Can you describe it? Delacroix used atmospheric perspective to add to the illusion of depth. He made the nearby figures very large and compressed against the front of the picture while making the distant figures dramatically smaller. Oath of Horatii. See the technique used by David to create the illusion of depth in this painting? Delacroix used atmospheric perspective to add the illusion of depth. He made the nearby figures very large and compressed against the front of the picture while making the distant figures dramatically smaller. We do have a little bit of one-point perspective where we see these lines here and these lines here and the lines of the tiles all leading back to a vanishing point. If you were to draw each of those lines, if you took a ruler and continued to draw each of those lines off into the distance, we'd see a vanishing point about right here, which is interesting because that's about where the tip of the swords are. That is where the tip of our pyramidal configuration is. Light and dark. Romantic artists, including Goya, relied on dramatic techniques such as chiaroscuro, the use of dark and light, to model figures, to capture emotionally charged subject matter in their canvases. In contrast, Rococo artists such as Watteau used pastel color schemes and delicate brushwork to depict their light-hearted themes. Which do you prefer, Goya's dramatic contrast of dark and light, or Watteau's luminous pastel scene? Goya used a dramatic light source to illuminate the main figure and create deep, rich shadows in the background. Watteau presented a pastel-colored scene with a luminous, iridescent sky. Rendering the human figure. Throughout Europe in the 19th century, artists had distinctive ways of portraying the human body. Some studied classical ideas of proportion, balance, and beauty. Others chose a more emotional approach, using energetic brushstrokes and extreme lighting to create a desired mood. Do you prefer smooth figures that resemble sculptural forms, or do you like to see figures enlivened by expressive brushwork? Classically inspired or lively and expressive, depicting the human figure. Shardene and Watteau were contemporaries, yet their painting styles were distinctly different. Think of how each artist depicted the human figure. Here we have Pilgrimage to Cythera by Watteau and Grace Before Meal by Shardene. How did the artists treat the figures differently? Watteau studied human anatomy closely and made many sketches of the human body. In Pilgrimage to Cythera, he used delicate yet lively brushstrokes to create dreamy, wistful figures. Shardene employed a naturalist style to depict ordinary people. In Grace Before Meal, he wielded his paintbrush meticulously to apply layers of oil paint, giving his subjects solid form and a distinctive air of polished realism. Classical inspirations. Think of how each artist depicted the human figures in these two paintings. Oath of Horatii by David and Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix. How are the figures treated differently? In neoclassical fashion, David used smooth, controlled brushworks to paint highly realistic figures that resembled ancient Greek or Roman sculptural forms. Delacroix fused traditional elements of classicism with the revolutionary flair of romanticism. His classical training is evident in Liberty's strong Greek profile. Inspired by the past, neoclassical artists revived the styles and techniques of ancient Greek and Roman artists. For example, the figures in Jacques-Louis David's paintings have many of the characteristics of classical sculpture. Romantic paintings reveal a Baroque influence. Artists such as Goya and Delacroix use the Baroque conventions of imparting a sense of drama through rich color, strong diagonals, contrast in light and dark, and loose brushstroke. Romantic painters drew inspiration from the rich color, strong diagonals, and contrast of light and dark typical of Baroque works such as Caravaggio's The Supper at Emmaus. Artistic inspiration. 3rd of May by Goya and The Conversion of St. Paul by Caravaggio. How does Goya's The 3rd of May, 1808 evoke Caravaggio's Baroque style? What similarities do you see? How about lighting? I see similarities in lighting. Do you remember that tenebrism effect? I'm seeing that tenebrism effect in both. Goya was influenced by Caravaggio's dramatic use of light and shadow. He used the bright light of the lantern to illuminate the scene and create strong diagonals in the composition, similar to Caravaggio's dynamic painting. Winged Victory of Samothrace and Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix. How does Delacroix's Liberty reflect classical conventions? What similarities do you see? Delacroix developed an artistic style that fused traditional elements of classicism with a revolutionary flair for romanticism. He depicted liberty with the proportions of a classical Greek profile. Historians suggest her strong pose and flowing ochre drapery pay homage to the Hellenistic sculpture Winged Victory of Samothrace. Oath of Horatii by David and Augustus of Primaporta, a Roman sculpture. What classical conventions did David use in his painting Oath of Horatii? David drew inspiration from the idealized figures created by Roman sculptors. His figures showed perfect proportion, physical fitness, and strong character. David's 3 Horatii are shown swearing their allegiance to Rome, hearkening back to the ancient Rome practice of using sculpture as propaganda to demonstrate the might and importance of the Roman Empire. Perfect. Let's see if we can answer these questions now. Question number 1. How did Romantic artists depart from neoclassical conventions? All right. How did Romantic artists, such as Delacroix, depart from the classical conventions? Neoclassical conventions. Is it Romantic artists use smooth brushstrokes? No, they're very fervent. Was it that they use one-point perspective? No. What was that perspective that they used? Atmospheric perspective, right? Was it that Romantic artists turned away from rational thinking and reason and depicted emotion and drama? Yes. Is it Romantic artists painted frivolous subjects? No, these were very serious political subjects. Good, so we found the answer. Question 2. What convention did Shardene and Delacroix use in these paintings to give the artworks a sense of harmony and stability? Oh, this is so easy. Harmony and stability. The pyramid configuration. Remember, that solid base of a pyramid creates the sense of harmony and stability. What is one similar, and let's talk about what these other things. One-point perspective, that's where you create a point and draw all the lines that lead to that point. And then foreshortening, that is when something looks like it's just pressed up against the edge of the painting. And tenebrism is that spotlight effect. Question 3. What is one similarity between Watteau's Pilgrimage to Cythera and Goya's The 3rd of May? A similarity. The artists depict politically charged historical events. No, this was Rococo. This was not politically charged. Remember, it's very frivolous activities of the aristocracy. The artists use lively, expressive brushstrokes. Maybe. I mean, these brushstrokes definitely aren't like the smooth realism that we're used to seeing in the classical and neoclassical era. The artists use a pyramid configuration to unify the characters. I definitely am seeing a pyramid configuration here. I don't see unification of the characters in this one, though, because remember we talked about, yeah, there is a subtle pyramid, but unifying the characters, no. These characters are dramatically set apart in darkness, and these are set apart in lightness, so I wouldn't say that. The artist created drama by using a single light source. Ooh, this is a tough one because this one's not a single light source. This is luminescent, the whole thing. So what's the best artist? I would have to probably go with lively expressive brushstrokes. That's what I'd have to pick. All right, so good job, everybody.